You are listening to the Queens of Quality podcast. This podcast will discuss some of the basic and not so basic impacts of compliance and quality within the pharmaceutical and biotech industries. We have a balance of laughter and education as we discuss the misconceptions about quality assurance within an organization. We are your hosts, Jen and Michelleanne. Let's get ready to start the show. Welcome back to Queens of Quality. Hi, Jen.
Hi, Michelleanne.
How's it going?
Pretty good. How are you?
Excellent. So today we're going to talk about ICH. Do you want to start with the intro of ICH?
Sure. So in our vernacular, ICH kind of like flows out pretty easily. So, but what ICH is the International Council on Harmonization. So a very, 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 very brief history is that it started with the US, EU, and really the UK before they became part of the EU, even though they're not anymore. Follow that thought logic. And then Japan. So is it three big influencers in the regulatory landscape years ago decided they should probably get together and come to a level of agreement on what the standards look like when it comes to the pharmaceutical industry. So there's the M series, the E series, the Q series, and the S series. And they all have their own areas. The ones that I primarily work in are the Q series and the E series. The Q series is quality. The E series is the efficacy. Not to be confused with the S series, which is safety.
Right.
But it's not that kind of safety. It's not PV type safety. So you'll find the pharmacovigilance related information in the E series. Again, just to keep it simple. So I hope people speak sarcasm.
That would be great.
I am fluent in sarcasm. I'm not fluent in any other language. And most people could argue that I'm not fluent in English either. But I am fluent in sarcasm. Exactly. So with ICH, again, the ones we primarily work in, especially with related to this particular podcast, is ICH E series. So like I said, they go E6, E2, EF, E2F, E2B. Those are the E2A. The one we're going to talk about in particular is E6, which is the GCP regulatory requirements, and E8, which is I'll go with relatively new, because again, it's all kind of relative. Well, the new release of it is relatively new. It originally came out in 97, but the update was done in 2021, and it's pretty significant. The title is General Guidelines Around Clinical Trials. Bottom line is it's about quality by design in your clinical trials.
Which we love.
We do love that.
By design.
Yeah. Because it's actually talking about, and I'm even going to go so far as to say it talks about the small Q quality by design versus quality by design, capital Q quality by design, actually from your quality department. So this quality by design within the clinical trials aspect can be done by your quality organization, your capital Q quality organization, or within the general principles set forth within your clinical organization that are generally done in conjunction with your capital Q quality organization. So again, it's a very collaborative effort. I know we've talked a lot in previous podcasts about the collaborative efforts necessary and the communication channels that are necessary between the functional areas. And this is essentially a culmination of it. This is what I would call a quintessential example as to the communication and partnerships that need to happen between the different departments to ensure that all of the requirements are met. Because we all have our own areas of specialty. it's a very much, it takes a village kind of thing. I always say, just because I know how to balance my checkbook does not mean I should be your director of finance. You know, you know, I just find it to be a great example. Just because I have an understanding of it doesn't mean I can actually do it.
Right.
And say that I am a subject matter expert in that area. So
I really appreciate you putting it in that way and quantifying it in that way, because there are a lot of pieces that we have talked about where we really are subject matter experts. Like, this is actually right up our alley. This is exactly how we got into this and exactly what happened that drew us to this. And then there are pieces where we're like, not in our boat.
exactly.
Can't even see it from our boat. And for me, finance is the perfect example of that.
I can tell you that you should have insurance for your clinical trials. I'm not the one to go out and assess it. That's not something
Please don't ask me any questions about that.
that's not within my remit. That's not within my area of expertise.
However, these pieces are.
Mhm.
So let's talk a little bit about specifically the ICH E6 and ICH E8. And it's going to
Okay.
be 6R3 and E8R1.
Yes. And just for people who aren't familiar with the vernacular, R1 means revision 1, R3 means revision 3. That's how you get to that grouping of letters or that terminology. Right now, you'll hear, at least from the E6 perspective, you might hear R2, you might hear R3. R2 is currently being phased out in a lot of areas because of R3. So essentially, we're in that weird transition period because some studies were started when R2 was in effect. Now we're heading into R3. So it's a little bit of a frame of reference to be, needs to be clearly understood first in terms of the remit.
So for R3, the end of the comments, the deadline for the comments for the last of the public consultation was October 20th for Health Canada. So everyone else has done their submission of comments. Now everyone has, but as of 3 days ago.
And I'm really glad that you brought up the Health Canada piece of it, because one of the things I neglected to mention was that ICH, yes, it started out with the UK, US, and Japan. However, it's a very global environment now.
Yes.
To your point, Health Canada, TGA, Anvisa, I think even SFDA does it as well. So the principles are now global.
Yes. And that's a big part of the goal, right? Is to have a global body that we can point to and say, these are where the regulations come from. And because of our familiarity with 21 CFR, which is the FDA's piece, we can generally point from 21 CFR to one of the ICH guidelines.
Correct.
And the same with EMA. We can generally point from the EMA and MHRA guidelines back to the ICH guidelines.
And just if I could complete that thought, because again, you talked about the regulation aspects of it all need to be codified by the independent governments. The ICH is a collaborative body that puts forth the expectations. Once everyone agrees, to your point, Health Canada just provided their final comments and that kind of thing. So we're getting very, very close to the end. Once R3 is official, it still has to go into the country, it needs to be codified. So again, that's where it's very complicated. See our podcast on regulatory environment.
Exactly. Like there are discussions and then discussions and then discussions. And because I view this as a little bit easier example to in EMA regulations, you have the EMA, which is the regulatory body, and then each individual country has further breakdowns with additional nuances.
Right.
So it's very similar to that. In fact, it's the same thing, just at a different level.
Exactly. Right.
So
Okay.
there we go.
I think that's enough context. Do you want to get
Okay.
into the meat of it?
Yes, please.
Okay.
All right. So what's unique about the E6R3 is the approaches to enhance transparency and clarification or provision of supplementary explanation to the application of GCP guidelines. So there's clarity on the scope of what the trials are going to do. One of the things that I really appreciate the most about it is principles. And I can't believe that we had to put this in here, but here we are. But this is where we are. Principles to remain relevant as technology, methods, and trial design evolve. We actually had to put that in there.
Right.
And I was talking with someone the other day about that kind of stuff where something as basic as someone asked if I had a fax. And I was like, no, because it's 2023. And then they asked if I wanted something with wet signature. And I was like, I want nothing with wet signature. I want nothing with wet signature. I want nothing in hard copy. Everything needs to be electronic. Like I have a printer. It's just a giant paperweight.
Yes. And actually, this brings up a very different point. And I'm going to try not to go down this rabbit hole because we can save this topic for a later date. But that's where, again, as technology continues to evolve, the adaptation to said technology is not always clear cut.
No, it's not.
And that's
It's not.
and I am bouncing up and down on the diving board before I jump into that rabbit hole. So I should probably just stop now.
Right. Well, because there is, right? There is a
Yes.
certain level of privilege that comes from saying my printer is a paperweight.
Right.
And when we're talking about, especially the way that things are evolving with decentralized trials,
Right.
we have more opportunity to be utilizing the technologies
Agreed.
to where we can not only utilize the technologies in areas like urban centers, but we can also utilize the technologies in very rural areas where there are populations who may not have been accessible for clinical trials, but who would very much benefit
Right.
from the advances in technology for this access.
And I feel like that's a whole other level of, that's probably another 4 podcasts we could do on the aspect.
Absolutely. And, I don't want to go, down that whole
Uh-huh.
piece, but
Right.
I also want to be able to make sure that we say this piece of the E6R3 makes those pieces possible.
Agreed. Yes.
So there we go. And the other parts, I'm going to let you talk about quality by design because I feel like I just really ripped off a Band-Aid here.
So, okay. So we talked about the E6 piece of it, and again, that ability to have you put it very eloquently in terms of basically the processes, the technology, the tools that we use. These principles are relevant regardless of what you utilize in order to get there. Full stop. One of those approaches is the quality by design aspects of it. Because when we talk about quality by design, it's traditionally been a very manufacturing procedure type of approach or the terminology within that space of the industry. That being said, and you mentioned the principles for E6, the principles of quality by design also apply to your clinical trials, your clinical studies, because you are designing a system of how things will actually get created. That what you are creating is the information on the participants of your studies so that you have all of that information in the end so that you can actually create your outcomes and your information that will then lead to further informed decisions about go, no go from your next phase. So that being said, We all move at 1,000 miles a minute. So quality by design requires you to pause.
Mhm.
It requires you to pause and be thoughtful about the planning and operations and which outcomes in which you're looking to achieve. So many people would say, we've been doing this all along.
But have we?
Have we really? I kind of wish people could see me right now because I'm like, maybe, maybe not, because we're going 1,000 miles a minute. And because we're going 1,000 miles a minute, what has a tendency to happen is my most annoying thing that happens in any organization, groupthink.
Oh,
Or you become that one person who is the person who speaks up because you're asking for that pause. And we can't pause. We have to keep going. Yes, absolutely. We have to keep going. And it is going to be a tremendous amount more expensive if you do not take that pause. Expensive for the patients, expensive for your organization, expensive for your team, expensive for your stakeholders. If you're a public company, it's going to cost your stockholders. So take the pause. It's that idea of pay me a little bit now or pay me a heck of a lot later to ensure that that quality by design, those quality by design aspects are utilized to design your clinical trial to the way and outcomes you expect it to be, like based on your hypotheses from all the other information you've gained in the meantime. So that's where, again, so often the prime example is your endpoint. So often it can be missed by just this much. And people don't necessarily understand why, because you had all this other information kind of thing. And then you have to readjust your expectations. You have to readjust maybe your dosing. You have to readjust something within, to my earlier comment, forces you to redo it. So that's why having that pause and really looking at things objectively to see what is possible versus what you want will actually save a tremendous amount of time, energy, angst, anger, frustration, disappointment later. That doesn't guarantee that your product will work. Keep that in mind because
oh
we've already
no.
talked about so many products that fail, right? How
Yeah.
much failure is a part of the business. And what the quality by design will do will ensure that, again, best possible outcome, your outcome is positive. Then we can move on with a level of confidence in the data that you have, or if unfortunately it doesn't turn out the way you want it to, that you've done everything possible so that you don't have to waste all that time, money, and effort trying to make it say what you want it to say.
So one of my favorite pieces within the actual guidance that really connects with this is that trial design should be operationally feasible and avoid unnecessary complexities. It's
That's my
the
favorite part.
I know.
My favorite part too. I want it to be a t-shirt.
Operationally feasible and avoid unnecessary complexities because, oh my goodness, like we have been in this business for a long time now.
Mhm.
And sometimes I wonder you know, if our mascot should be Rube Goldberg.
Yeah.
Like, do
So
you really?
yeah. So for anyone who doesn't know who Rube Goldberg is, one, I highly recommend you Google it. And two, quick example, if you've ever played the game Mousetrap as a kid or an adult with your kids, or just as an adult because you like it, that is a Rube Goldberg machine where it's all extremely complicated to trap the mouse in the little basket thingy.
The
Yeah.
most complex way to get from point A to point B,
Yes.
that's
Yeah.
Rube. That's our
Right.
buddy Rube.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I know I've mentioned this before, I'm a Six Sigma black belt. One of the things that I come back to is like sometimes there are things that we have to do because we have to do them. Again, it comes back to the regulatory requirements. We need to be able to demonstrate certain things. Having additional work with no value nails on a chalkboard for me. That's the easiest way for me to explain that.
Yeah.
Because it's also complicated to start with. Why make it harder?
Yep. So the beauty of the E6R3 is the way that it goes into because if you look at the table of contents for the E8R1, quality by design of clinical trials, of clinical studies is actually a part of that table of contents for the document. And critical to quality factors. So it's outlined in there already. And how to do that. So really it goes back to what we need to do is follow the guidelines and follow the regulations.
And I really appreciate the fact that they are two distinct ideas because they each have their own guidance.
Yes.
And the way that they complement each other is almost like an art. I kind of feel like it's almost like, the Marvel Universe storyboard where all the stories just happen to connect so beautifully. And I'm like, how do they do that? What is that random little piece that they brought in from that movie 10, 15 years ago? Like, how do they do that?
It's one of my favorite things. So, you got me.
I know. That's why we're friends.
You had me at MCU.
Yeah, but that's what it's like, especially with the with the guidance documents, because the regulations, as we stated earlier, are with the countries.
Right.
With a body like this, who has created all these different kinds of guidance documents, the fact that they actually meet, dovetail, come together, so it really becomes more of an art than a science kind of thing. The way that they really have come together in such a way that it's almost like quality by design.
It is.
So yeah, it all comes back to the quality by design. It's all very purposeful.
Yep.
And you take the time to do it.
Absolutely. So that is our take on ICH and the E6R3 and E8R1.
Perfect.
Thank you very much. And we will see you next time.
Thanks, Michelleanne.
Thanks, Jen. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to us at hello@Metisconsultingservices.com. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Queens of Quality podcast. To continue the conversation, please follow our LinkedIn profile, Metis Consulting Services, or for additional resources, visit our website at metisconsultingservices.com. You can listen to the show free anywhere you find podcasts. Love the show? Don't forget to subscribe, like, review, and share with others. Thank you again for listening, and we will see you next time.